Tonight, let's take a quiet journey across the bridges of the ancient world, those remarkable structures built long before steel existed. For as long as humans have walked the earth, they have encountered obstacles, rivers, ravines, marshes, gorges, and for just as long they have found ways to cross them. The history of bridges is the history of human ingenuity, of solving problems with whatever materials lay close at hand. Let us begin with the simplest bridge of all. A fallen tree. Imagine a stream running through a forest. The water is too deep to wade, too swift to swim, but a storm has toppled an old tree, and it lies across the stream, its trunk spanning from bank to bank. You step onto it, carefully balancing, and you cross. This is the origin of the bridge. A natural accident that humans learned to replicate. If a fallen tree could span a stream, then surely people could fell a tree themselves, positioning it deliberately where they needed to cross. These log bridges were the first intentional structures of their kind. Simple, practical, and effective. They required no engineering knowledge, no specialized tools, just a tree and the means to cut it. The selection of the tree mattered. It had to be tall enough to span the water, strong enough to bear weight, straight enough to lie flat. Oak was prized for its strength, pine for its length. Builders learned to recognize the right tree for the job, to fell it carefully so it landed where they needed it. From the log bridge, builders moved to the beam bridge. Instead of a single trunk, they might use several logs laid side by side, creating a wider surface. Or they might flatten the top of the log, hewing it with axes to make a smoother walkway. Planks might be laid across the logs, creating a more even surface for walking and for wheels. For longer spans, they discovered that logs could be supported in the middle. A pile of stones in the stream bed or a post driven into the mud would hold up the center of the bridge. Now the span could be twice as long. Add another support, and it could be longer still. These simple beam bridges made of timber and stone supports served humanity for thousands of years. You can still find versions of them in rural areas around the world, spanning small streams and irrigation channels. They are humble structures, easily overlooked, but they represent a fundamental understanding of how materials behave under load. But not all obstacles could be crossed with logs. Some rivers were too wide, some gorges too deep. Builders needed new techniques, new ideas. In mountainous regions, people developed rope bridges. The materials varied depending on what was available. Vines in tropical forests, twisted plant fibers in the Himalayas, animal hides in the steppes of Central Asia. Wherever people lived near difficult terrain, they found ways to weave and twist local materials into ropes strong enough to span the gaps. The basic principle was elegant. 2 ropes stretched across the gap, anchored firmly on each side. Between them, a walkway of planks or woven material. The bridge would sway and bounce as you crossed, but it would hold. Walking across a rope bridge required a certain faith. The movement felt unsettling at first. Each step sent vibrations through the whole structure. The bridge would dip and rise with your weight. But if you kept your pace steady, if you trusted the fibers that held you, you would reach the other side. The Inca Empire built remarkable rope bridges in the Andes Mountains. They wove thick cables from grass fibers, each cable as thick as a person's body. These cables were anchored to stone abutments on either side of the gorge. The walkway hung between them, narrow and swaying, but strong enough to carry people and llamas across chasms hundreds of feet deep. The grass used for these bridges was a tough mountain variety called ichu. Workers would harvest it by the armful, then beat and soften the stalks. Small fibers were twisted into cords. Cords were braided into ropes. Ropes were woven into cables. Each stage multiplied the strength of the material, transforming humble grass into something that could support the weight of a trade caravan. These grass rope bridges required constant maintenance. The fibers weakened over time, exposed to sun and rain. Every year, communities would gather to rebuild them, weaving new cables to replace the old. It was a communal effort, a shared responsibility, a tradition passed down through generations. The bridge belonged to everyone who used it, and everyone contributed to its upkeep. Let us turn now to stone. Stone is heavy and strong, but it has a limitation. It does not bend without breaking. A beam of stone spanning any significant distance will crack under its own weight. This might seem like an insurmountable problem for bridge builders, but they found a solution: the arch. The arch is one of the most elegant structural forms ever devised. Instead of a straight beam, the arch curves upward, redirecting the forces of gravity outward and downward. Each stone in an arch is wedge-shaped, pressed against its neighbors by the weight above. The arch does not resist gravity, it channels it. The physics of an arch are beautiful in their simplicity. Gravity pulls down on every stone, but because of the wedge shape, that downward force is converted into sideways pressure. Each stone pushes against the stones beside it. All of these sideways forces eventually reach the abutments at the ends of the arch, where they are absorbed by massive foundations. We do not know exactly when or where the first stone arch bridge was built. The technique appears independently in many cultures. The ancient Romans became its greatest masters, but they were not its inventors. Arch bridges existed in Mesopotamia, in Greece, in China, all before Roman engineers began their work. What the Romans contributed was scale. They built arch bridges that spanned great rivers, that carried roads across deep valleys that still stand today after 2,000 years. Consider the Pons Fabricius in Rome, built in 62 BCE. It crosses the Tiber River, connecting the riverbank to an island in the middle of the stream. Its two arches have endured for over 2 millennia. People still walk across it today, their footsteps falling on stones laid by workers in the time of Julius Caesar. The Romans understood that the arch required strong foundations. The forces channeled by the arch had to go somewhere, and that somewhere was down and outward into the abutments at each end. These abutments had to be massive, solid, anchored deep into bedrock, or founded on thick layers of stone. They also understood that water was the enemy of bridge foundations. A river's current erodes soil. Floods scour the riverbed. Ice jams can strike with tremendous force. Roman engineers developed techniques to protect their piers, surrounding them with barriers called cofferdams that allowed workers to build in relatively dry conditions. Building a cofferdam was itself a major undertaking. Workers would drive wooden stakes into the riverbed, forming a ring around the area where the pier would stand. Between two rings of stakes, they would pack clay, creating a watertight barrier. Then they would pump or bail out the water inside, exposing the riverbed. Working quickly before the water seeped back in, they would lay the foundations. The construction of a Roman arch bridge was a massive undertaking. First, workers would build the piers and abutments, the vertical supports that would hold the arches. These had to be perfectly positioned and absolutely solid. Then came the scaffolding. Workers would construct a temporary wooden framework in the exact shape of the planned arch. This framework, called centering, supported the arch stones during construction. The centering itself was a sophisticated piece of engineering. It had to be strong enough to support the weight of all the arch stones before they locked together. It had to be precisely shaped so that the completed arch would have the correct curve, and it had to be designed for easy removal once the arch was complete. One by one, workers would place the arch stones, called voussoirs, on the centering. They started at the bottom and worked upward from both sides simultaneously. The final stone, placed at the very top of the arch, was called the keystone. The placement of the keystone was a moment of truth. Until it was in place, the arch had no structural integrity. The voussoir leaned against the centering, waiting, but once the keystone was tapped into position, everything changed. the arch locked together, each stone pressing against its neighbors, the whole structure suddenly rigid and self-supporting. Workers would then remove the centering. The arch remained, standing on its own, bearing its own weight and ready to bear the weight of whatever crossed it. The Romans built arched bridges throughout their empire. In Spain, the bridge at Alcantara spans the Tagus River, with arches rising over 150 feet above the water. In France, the Pont de Garde carries an aqueduct across the Garden River, its 3 tiers of arches stacked one above another. These structures were built to last. The Romans used a type of concrete in their construction, mixing volcanic ash with lime to create a material that hardened over time. This Roman concrete actually grew stronger as the centuries passed. 2,000 years later, their bridges remain. Traffic still crosses the Ponts Fabricius. Tourists still marvel at the Pont de Garde. After the fall of Rome, bridge-building knowledge persisted, though the scale diminished. Medieval Europeans continued to build stone arch bridges, often with a slightly pointed shape rather than the Roman semicircle. These pointed arches could span wider gaps with less material, a refinement that made bridge building somewhat easier. Medieval bridges often featured more than just a roadway. They might include chapels where travelers could pray for safe crossing. They might include houses and shops built along the edges of the bridge, transforming it into a kind of street suspended over water. The Old London Bridge, completed in 1209, was one such bridge. It spanned the Thames with 19 irregular arches. Buildings lined both sides, some reaching 7 stories tall. It was a bridge, a neighborhood, and a marketplace all in one. Shops sold everything from cloth to cutlery. Houses rose above the shops, their residents living their entire lives on the bridge. It stood for over 600 years before being replaced. In Florence, the Ponte Vecchio still shows what a medieval bridge's marketplace looked like. Shops lined both sides, their upper stories jutting out over the water. Originally, these were butcher shops, but now they sell jewelry and art. The bridge remains as lively today as it was 5 centuries ago. Let us journey eastward now to China. Chinese bridge builders developed their own traditions, quite different from those of Europe. They worked in stone and in wood, creating structures of remarkable beauty and ingenuity. The Jiaozhou Bridge, built around 605 CE, is one of the oldest stone arch bridges still standing. It spans the Jiao River in Hebei Province, a single arch nearly 120 feet long. But this arch is not a simple semicircle. It is what engineers call a segmental arch, a flattened curve that rises less steeply than a full semicircle. This design was revolutionary. A segmental arch requires less material than a full semicircle. It also creates a lower, longer span, easier for vehicles and pedestrians to climb. The Jiaozhou Bridge rises only about 23 feet above its abutments while spanning the entire width of the river. The bridge also features open spandrels, small secondary arches built into the shoulders of the main arch. These openings served multiple purposes. They reduced the weight of the bridge. They allowed floodwaters to pass through without placing as much pressure on the structure, and they gave the bridge its distinctive, delicate appearance. The Jiaozhou Bridge has survived earthquakes, floods, and wars for over 1,400 years. It remains in use today, a testament to the skill of its builders. Chinese timber bridges were equally impressive. The Rainbow Bridge of Kaifeng, depicted in a famous scroll painting from the Song dynasty, used an ingenious interlocking wooden framework to span a canal without any supports in the water. The timbers wove together like the fingers of clasped hands, each piece supporting and being supported by its neighbors. This style of bridge, sometimes called a woven bridge or Chinese timber arch, distributed weight across many interconnected members. If one timber weakened, the others would carry its load. The structure was redundant, resilient. able to endure despite the gradual decay of individual components. In the southern provinces of China, covered wooden bridges served communities for centuries. These structures protected the timber from rain and sun, extending the life of the wood. The covered bridges became gathering places where villagers would meet to talk, to trade, to shelter from storms. Some featured benches along the walls, inviting travelers to rest and watch the water flow beneath. Let us move now to South Asia, to India. Indian bridge builders worked with the materials available to them. In some regions that meant stone. In others it meant rope and bamboo. And in the living wetlands of Meghalaya, in northeastern India, it meant trees themselves. The living root bridges of Meghalaya are unlike anything else in the world. They are grown, not built. Local people train the roots of rubber fig trees to span streams and gorges. Over decades, the roots thicken and intertwine, forming a living bridge that grows stronger with age. The process begins by guiding young roots across a gap, often using hollowed-out beetle nut trunks as guides. The roots grow toward the opposite bank, drawn by moisture and soil. When they reach the other side, they take hold, anchoring themselves. More roots are added, woven together, trained to follow the desired path. A young root bridge might take 15 or 20 years to become strong enough to use, but once established, it will last for centuries, growing stronger each year as the roots thicken. Some living root bridges in Meghalaya are estimated to be over 500 years old. They can support the weight of 50 people at once. These bridges require no maintenance in the traditional sense. They maintain themselves, growing new roots to replace any that die, adapting to changes in the landscape. They are resilient against floods, flexible enough to move with the water rather than resist it. In the highlands of Peru and Bolivia, communities continued the Inca tradition of grass rope bridges into the modern era. The Queshuachica Bridge, spanning the Apurimac River, has been rebuilt continuously for over 500 years. Every June, local communities gather to weave new ropes from ichu grass and reconstruct the bridge, following traditions passed down from their ancestors. The process takes 3 days. On the first day, the old bridge is cut down and falls into the river below. On the second, the new cables are stretched across the gorge. On the third, the walkway is woven and the bridge is blessed. It is a ceremony, a festival, and a practical necessity all at once. Let us think about pontoon bridges, another ancient form. When no permanent crossing existed and the river was too deep for piles, builders sometimes turned to floating bridges. Boats or rafts, anchored in place, would support a roadway of planks. The bridge rose and fell with the water level, swaying with the current, but it served its purpose. The Persian king Xerxes famously built a pontoon bridge across the Hellespont in 480 BCE, allowing his army to march from Asia into Europe. According to ancient sources, this bridge used hundreds of ships lashed together, a temporary span more than a mile long. When a storm destroyed the first attempt, Xerxes ordered the engineers executed and the sea itself whipped as punishment. The second attempt succeeded and his army crossed. Pontoon bridges appeared throughout history whenever armies needed to cross rivers quickly. They were not permanent structures, not intended to last, but they solved an immediate problem with available materials. A boat that could float could also support a roadway. Clapper bridges offer another glimpse into ancient bridge building. Found throughout England and parts of Europe, these simple structures consisted of large flat stones placed atop stone piers. The stones were sometimes enormous, requiring many workers to move and position them. The Clapper Bridge at Post Bridge on Dartmoor, for example, uses slabs weighing several tons each. These bridges served farming communities for centuries. Farmers crossed them with their sheep and cattle. Merchants crossed with their goods. The stones wore smooth from centuries of use, their surfaces polished by countless feet and hooves. In Japan, bridge builders developed their own distinctive traditions. Some bridges were built in graceful arched shapes, painted red or black, serving as entrances to temples and shrines. These bridges carried symbolic meaning as well as practical function. Crossing a temple bridge represented a transition from the ordinary world to sacred space. Wooden bridges in Japan were often designed to harmonize with their surroundings. They curved gently over streams and gardens, framed views of mountains and waterfalls, became part of the landscape rather than mere interruptions of it. Even a simple footbridge might be built with care and attention to beauty. As we near the end of our journey, let us consider what all these bridges have in common. They were all built by people working with what they had. Logs in the forest, stone in the mountains, grass on the high plains, roots in the tropical wetlands. Each community developed techniques suited to their environment and their needs. They were all built without the materials we take for granted today. No steel cables, no reinforced concrete, no power tools or heavy machinery. Every stone was shaped by hand. Every timber was cut with axes and saws. Every rope was woven fiber by fiber, and yet they worked. Many of them still work, still carry people across rivers and gorges, still do what they were designed to do. The builders of these bridges understood forces and materials in an intuitive way. They might not have had the mathematical formulas that modern engineers use, but they knew what worked and what failed. They learned from mistakes, from collapsed spans and eroded foundations. They refined their techniques over generations, each bridge built better than the last. They understood that a bridge is more than a physical structure. It is a connection. It joins communities that would otherwise be separated. It enables trade, travel, communication. A bridge across a river might mean the difference between isolation and integration, between scarcity and abundance. People cared for their bridges. They built them with pride. They maintained them with devotion. The covered bridges of New England, the stone arches of Rome, the grass ropes of Peru, all required regular attention, regular labor. Communities organized themselves around this work, assigning responsibility, allocating resources. A bridge was a shared inheritance. Those who built it would not necessarily live to see its final decay. Those who crossed it might never have known its builders. But the bridge connected them all, the living and the dead, the past and the future. The names of most ancient bridge builders have been lost to time. We do not know who first guided the fig tree roots across the streams of Meghalaya. We do not know who designed the first Inca rope bridge. We know the names of a few Roman engineers, but only a few. Most bridges were built by anonymous hands, by workers whose names were never recorded, whose individual contributions were absorbed into the collective achievement. And yet their work endures. The stones they shaped still carry weight. The techniques they developed still inform modern engineering. Every bridge builder who came after them learned in some way from what they had done. Tonight, as you rest, perhaps you can imagine yourself standing at the foot of an ancient bridge. The stone is cool beneath your hand. The water flows below, murmuring softly. You step onto the bridge and begin to cross. The stones are worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Generations have walked this path before you. Merchants and soldiers, pilgrims and farmers. They have all crossed here, all made their way from one bank to the other. The river sparkles in the fading light. A bird calls from the trees on the far shore. You are walking the same path that countless others have walked, crossing the same span that has connected these two banks for hundreds of years. There is something reassuring in that continuity. The bridge has stood through wars and floods, through seasons beyond counting. It will stand long after you have passed. You reach the far side and step onto solid ground. Behind you, the bridge waits for the next traveler. It has all the time in the world. The engineers who built these structures could not know how long their work would last. They built for their own time, their own needs. But in solving their problems with care and skill, they created something that transcended their own lives. The arch that the Roman masons shaped still bears weight. The roots that the Megalayan farmer guided still grow strong. The grass that Peruvian hands wove still spans the gorge. All bridges, in the end, are acts of faith. Faith that the materials will hold. Faith that the design is sound. Faith that those who come after will value the crossing and maintain the span. The bridges of the ancient world were built on that faith, and they have been rewarded by endurance. Now the light fades over the river. The last of the sunset colors the water gold and rose. The bridge stands in silhouette against the sky, its arches dark against the glow. Somewhere a nightbird begins to sing. The air grows cool. The river flows on, as it has flowed for thousands of years, beneath the bridges that span it. Let yourself drift now, like the water beneath the bridge. Let the gentle current carry you towards rest. The bridges will be there tomorrow, as they have been for centuries. For now, there is only the quiet of evening, the soft sound of water, the patient stone. Rest well,